Feel free to return to our channel at any time. Woody Allen, who is now 88 years old, thinks on a figure who, in his words, has been idolized for too long as he sits in a darkly lit Manhattan apartment, his voice steady but sharp. Even Joan Baez, a folk hero whose advocacy and voice have been admired, is not exempt. The findings made by Allen are more than criticism. They are a series of astute observations that highlight the less positive aspects of Baez's legacy. There was a lot of conflict, animosity, and inconsistency throughout her career, even though she was a representative of her generation. In his 1972 film Play It Again, Sam, Woody Allen is wooing a teenage Joan Baez, who is already a folk hero, to star in the picture. It appeared like the ideal combination: Baez's free-spirited charisma and Allen's neurotic humor. What started out as a warm and fuzzy partnership ended up being a chilly and strained exchange. According to Allen, Baez was a pain because she was recalcitrant and ignored his orders. He came out as haughty and inflexible to her, apathetic toward all things not directly related to his creative vision. Their discussions soon devolved into arguments, and Baez eventually dropped out of the project altogether. Allen claims that Baez's obstinacy manifested itself in her reluctance to compromise throughout her career, leading to the estrangement of colleagues and the abandonment of numerous unfinished endeavors. More than the failure of a single project, the aftermath was the clash of two powerful personalities. Allen portrayed Baez as an utter nightmare to collaborate with. The love affair that enchanted the folk scene of the 1960s, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, is probably not news to you. Tension and unresolved animosity sat behind the mutual activism and music. Despite Dylan's relative obscurity at the time, Baez had exposed him to her audience by inviting him to perform on stage. Dylan started to put more space between himself and Baez as his star started to rise. At the peak of his stardom, Dylan turned down Baez's invitation to perform on stage with him, leaving her feeling abandoned. Even worse, she said he deliberately ignored her in favor of collaborating with people whose styles were more compatible with his developing sound. Their work partnership crumbled in a climate of suspicion, and their personal relationship collapsed due to allegations of selfishness and neglect. Dylan's callous disregard for Baez's efforts made her feel used, and the animosity between them persisted for years. In contrast to Dylan's tragic love story, Baez and Judy Collins' animosity was the result of a long-simmering artistic competition. Much like Baez, Collins was a towering figure in folk music, but not necessarily in a good way. Collins was allegedly too commercial, a polished performer who valued popularity more than depth, in Baez's opinion. Baez took great satisfaction in her honesty and political engagement. The feud escalated into an open feud after Collins became famous for covering Joni Mitchell's "Both Sides Now," a tune that Baez allegedly thought was too sentimental. Although Collins was no stranger to Baez's biting criticisms, she still found her patronizing. Although they behaved civilly in public, witnesses say they could feel Baez's subtle animosity for Collins building up during industry events. Their rivalry mirrored larger folk movement tensions. Baez was trying to establish herself as the genre's most authentic voice, while her contemporaries were trying to discredit her. Joan Baez's unwavering commitment to her views has caused her to clash with concert promoters and the press, despite the admiration of her followers. When Baez was at the height of her activism in the 60s and 70s, she often had confrontations with promoters who saw her political remarks as a drawback. While on tour in the Midwest, Baez made headlines for a notoriously anti-war speech she delivered. Boos erupted from the audience, and several even left the venue in the middle of the performance. Baez refused to tone down her rhetoric despite demands from promoters, which resulted in a string of cancellations. In conservative-leaning media outlets, she was seen as someone who would rather lecture her audience than entertain them. The persistent criticism from organizers and journalists slightly damaged Baez's reputation as a performer, despite her characteristically rebellious attitude. Baez had her critics even among peace activists. She was a leading advocate for human rights and nonviolence, but her ideals frequently ran counter to the practicality of her fellow campaigners. Some thought she was overly dedicated to her cause and wouldn't budge even when it would have helped the cause. One instance is when Baez allegedly refused to share the platform with speakers she thought were too extreme during a large anti-war demonstration in Washington. There was division among the event's organizers as a result of Baez's refusal, which many saw as threatening the event's cohesion. Some respected her moral attitude, but others considered her as a polarizing character whose ideas frequently impeded group development. An icon forever, Joan Baez, when people think of the folk revival or the protest movement of the 1960s, her name immediately comes to mind. Despite the indelible mark she left behind through her courageous action and haunting voice, her legacy is far from perfect. A patchwork of paradoxes, with moments of utter isolation interspersed with moments of great bravery and broken connections. Those who crossed her path generally recount a story laced with tension, irritation, and, occasionally, resentment, even though the world may praise her as a hero. For every rousing applause Baez received on the most illustrious venues in the world, there was a strained relationship or a painful breakup behind the scenes. Although Woody Allen made some astute remarks regarding her rigidity, these were not one-off criticisms, but rather a pattern that persisted throughout her career. Although her dogged pursuit of truth, justice, and art won her many admirers, Baez frequently shut down any possibility of compromise or disagreement. Her obstinateness was both her strongest suit and the thing that drove people away from her. Imagining Joan Baez at an anti-war demonstration, her voice echoing across the crowd of thousands united in their opposition to the war. People who wanted change could not have been more united by her music, her words, or just being in her presence. That harmony, however, frequently disintegrated when the audience wasn't watching. When Baez stood firm for what she believed in, she often caused friction with those around her. Many of her acquaintances and other campaigners found it difficult to understand how she could hold such high principles while simultaneously acknowledging the fallibility of humans. Her music brought people together regardless of their politics or culture, but her behind-the-scenes antics frequently drove a wedge between her and her loved ones. Baez was notorious for demanding the impossible of herself, her associates, and the causes she fought for. While she had high expectations for others, she occasionally damaged relationships that could have helped her along the way. Her intensity, passion, and moral clarity, the very qualities that made her an icon, also made her a lonely figure when she was alone. The paradoxical legacy of Baez, her life, is both an inspiration and a warning about the consequences of standing firm in one's beliefs. Her art and activism reached people all across the world because she would not budge. However, she frequently found herself standing alone due to that very rejection. Cut ties with the people who could have been her most reliable supporters. This paradox is what makes Baez's story so captivating. With an irresistible combination of charm and intelligence, she was a lighthouse and a thorn in everyone's side. Whether it was with Bob Dylan, Judy Collins, or even the people who put on concerts, her relationships were characterized by extreme highs and lows. Others looked up to her as a hero. It was foolish to truly accept such an unpredictable and unyielding force of nature as she was. It was never Joan Baez's style to do things the easy way. She could have gone much farther if she had opted for a more moderate course of action, mending fences and forming coalitions. That, however, was never her style. The journey to greatness for Baez required sacrifices from everyone around her as well as herself, an unyielding commitment to the path. Despite her admirable willingness to stand alone, she frequently paid a price for it. Baez stayed true to herself even as other folk musicians in the movement discovered methods to deal with the pressures of stardom and activism. Even when bending would have alleviated tensions or repaired relationships, she still wouldn't budge. This is brought home by Woody Allen's comments, which serve as a sobering reminder that Baez's unwavering character, which contributed to her fame, also hindered her ability to form meaningful relationships. The ups and downs, the groundbreaking accomplishments and lost chances that make up Baez's life are a study in contrasts. Her legacy is characterized by genuine, unfiltered humanity rather than flawlessness. It serves as a sobering reminder that becoming great isn't always free, and that it frequently costs not only the achiever but also others around them. Living her life with ferocious authenticity was a choice Joan Baez made, And while it secured her place in history, it also meant that her journey would be filled with both remarkable accomplishments and profoundly human imperfections. The difficulties of living with conviction is the central theme of her tale, which extends beyond her music and advocacy. Along the way, bridges burned and unquenchable flames of brightness flared brighter. A life that has always been riveting, inspiring, and thought-provoking is becoming even more so as the tales of her past come to light.